Hello there. You're listening to Oyla, a science podcast for students. We tell stories that make you smarter. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our latest episodes. You can discover even more about science and the world around us in our magazine, so head over to Oyla to check it out.
The great Paganini believed this instrument to be in no way inferior to the violin. It has no equal in the expressiveness and intimacy of its sound, and in democracy and accessibility, it is the uncontested champion across all time and cultures. Hello, friends, and welcome to Oyla Podcast. Today, we dive into the history of a guitar. The guitar greatly influenced music starting only in the 20th century, but in its basic form, it has been around for a long time. The earliest artifacts date to the 2nd century BCE. A resonating body, long neck, and strings, that's all you need to create a guitar. Materials were whatever was on hand. Dried pumpkin, turtle shell, or a solid piece of wood were used as the body, and fibers from sheep and cattle intestines as strings. The father of classical guitar is believed to be the Andalusian master Antonio de Torres Jurado, who lived in the middle of the 19th century. Francisco Tárrega, whose name any serious guitarist will know, played on a Torres guitar. It was Torres who determined the appearance of the modern guitar, the body with the 7-spring fan bracing system, and the customary location of the scale, frets, and bridge. The classical guitar is strictly a chamber instrument, which, because of its small size, cannot sound as powerful as a piano or organ. The design of the classical guitar is the result of centuries-old searches for materials. The quality of the face of a guitar, the soundboard, is responsible for the richness of sound. For the best result, aged cedar gives a soft sound with some languor, or spruce, louder and brighter, should be used. For particularly valuable instruments, craftsmen use German alpine spruce, which grows in the south of Germany. Its wood is characterized by its exceptional uniformity of fibers, giving it a unique sound without excessive sharpness. Only slightly inferior is the red spruce, growing on the slopes of the Adirondack Ridge in Nova Scotia. Other parts of the guitar body are also made of wood, such as mahogany, rosewood, especially popular is Brazilian rosewood, maple, and walnut. Even modern electric guitars, for which the acoustic properties of the body are not so critical, are mostly made of wood, the previously mentioned maple, which can be distinguished by its varieties of use such as firewood, flooring, and others, rosewood, linden, alder, poplar, and ash. The continuing fate of the guitar is connected with the American melting pot, which gave rise to such musical phenomena as country, folk, and blues. At the gatherings of tired cowboys and lumberjacks, plain, cheap guitars played an important role, sometimes joined by a simple fiddle, violin, and drum. Over time, talented performers stepped onto the stage at fairs and traveling circuses, but under the noise and racket of the crowd, the typical guitar was not audible. This is where the paths of classical and modern guitars diverge. First and foremost, the changes affected the strings. Instead of gut strings, the Americans used steel wire. The combination of the enlarged body and metal strings produced a very loud sound. But such an iron guitar preserved its structure poorly. The tension of the steel strings caused them to twist and break the housing. A solution was found by a master at the company C.F. Martin. Instead of thickening the soundboard, which dramatically worsens the sound, they strengthened the body, gluing supports in an X shape instead of the usual Torres fan bracing. The newly designed guitars were, quite literally, a resounding success. That's why vintage Martin guitars, especially the Dreadnought model, are hunted by collectors. Orville Gibson, the founder of the Gibson Guitar Company, which produced stringed instruments, presented the future of the guitar a bit differently. He was inspired by classical stringed instruments, violins, cellos, violas. His first innovation was the curved upper deck, as with violins, increasing the internal volume and improving the resonance conditions. Instead of the traditional round hole, Gibson guitars had violin F cutouts on the sides of the soundboard. An anchor rod was built into the neck, which dramatically increased its rigidity and strength. Gibsons have a very different sound, as musicians say, crystal. In capable hands, the new guitars helped to accentuate certain passages, every note of which sounded clearly. The usual instruments, including Martins, worked perfectly as part of the orchestra, creating a velvety and deep texture. But for improvising musicians, something different was required. That something different came with the brilliant idea to electrify the guitar. The guitar body is a resonating wooden box, the sound of which can be recorded with a conventional microphone, as they do today with classical guitars. But, along with the wanted sound, the microphone also picks up ambient noise. What if you make the guitar soundboard itself into a microphone chamber and attach the pickup directly to it? Piezoelectric crystals that convert mechanical vibrations into alternating currents are best suited for this purpose. Piezo sensors are insensitive to noise and electrical interference. There are plenty of them on any stage, and the sound of the guitar is transmitted in its entirety, regardless of the type of strings, the intricacies of the body structure, and other factors. What about steel strings? They work with other pickups, electromagnetic, generating electromotive forces in time with the vibrations of the string, more precisely, the system string core coil system. Of course, they are not perfect and cannot work with other types of strings, such as nylon. Of all the possible directions of string vibrations, the electromagnetic sensor senses only those which are perpendicular to the plane of the coil. This means that the sound spectrum is severely depleted. Yet, the coil is extremely susceptible to electrical interference. To minimize this, two coil sensors, humbuckers, are used. Included in the antiphase, the stray signals are mutually compensated. However, Helmuth Lemme, a guru in the field of electric guitars, says, the pickup has no sound, only characteristics of transmission. The sensors only take the sound material from the strings and change it each in its own way. Install the same Gibson sensor on the Les Paul and Super 400 CES, and you will hear a completely different sound. But even the best pickup will not help if the guitar has a bad body and bad strings. The basic rule: garbage in, garbage out. Magnetic sensors, in principle, do not need a resonating chamber. In fact, a chamber can be harmful due to the arising acoustic feedback. So, the first guitar with magnetic pickups was officially called the frying pan. Its body was molded from Bakelite resin. A prototype of the famous Gibson Les Paul even bore the offensive nickname the log. The idea behind these solid bodies was to counteract significant mechanical stress. If you look through the Rolling Stone Illustrated History of Rock and Roll, you will find that references to the instruments of leading musicians are reduced to only a few models: the Gibson Les Paul and two famous guitars of Leo Fender, the Telecaster and the Stratocaster. Duane Allman, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore, the authority of each of these guitarists today is indisputable, and you won't find any better recommendations. The first models of the famous electric guitars appeared more than 60 years ago. The Telecaster prototype was built exclusively to test new pickups, with separate magnets for each string. For the first time, guitars began to be made on the assembly line. The body was glued together from three typical pine parts. A 21-fret maple neck, without anchors in the first models, was attached to it by a steel plate with 4 screws. A bridge, a mechanical node acting as a bridge and adjusting the height and length of strings, was put on the body with 3 steel saddles. Next to the bridge at a slight angle was installed a single coil pickup. They hadn't yet progressed to 2 coil humbuckers. The knobs and switch were attached to the bottom with a metal bracket. The black Bakelite cover on the body was fastened with 5 screws. This is how the prototype Esquire appeared, and 6 months later, the Broadcaster, later renamed due to concerns over competition with the Telecaster, appeared. In 1954, the legendary Stratocaster burst onto the market, and for many years, it determined how an electric guitar should look and, most importantly, sound. 3 pickups, the characteristic shape of the body with horns, and a new bridge with tremolo springs, the instrument has become a constructive standard for many manufacturers. Another outstanding example was manufactured only by Gibson. The history of the famous model Les Paul is full of drama. For many years, Orville Gibson professed the principle of conservative perfection, rejecting any innovations and changes. Therefore, when the famous musician Les Paul introduced him to a homemade guitar of a new design, a pine bar with a cross-section of 4 by 4 inches, glued between the halves of the body sawn in half, Gibson was less than enthusiastic. Self-made pickups were attached to the log, and the neck was screwed on with the help of steel corners. Les Paul successfully performed with this instrument and even managed to rank highly on the charts. Orville Gibson called the homemade guitar a mop and asked not to waste his time on such trifles, but pretty soon, Gibson had a lot of free time. The success of the Fender electric guitar meant that there was a new, fast-growing sector of the market to which he had absolutely nothing to contribute. In 1950, Ted McCarty took over Gibson and immediately said, "We need fresh ideas." Together with a team of engineers, the new chief worked independently. Les Paul was not involved in the project. On the contrary, he did not want to hear a word about Gibson. Through trial and error, the designers went through dozens of materials. For the central block, they even tried a piece of railroad track. In the end, their choice was maple and mahogany. From previous models, the guitar inherited the form of an archtop with a convex upper body. The mahogany neck with rosewood fingerboard had 20 frets and was connected to the body around the 16th fret. So that the guitarist could reach the upper registers, the bottom featured a Venetian cutaway. The electrical component was represented by 2 single-coil pickups with independent adjustment for the timbre and the output signal. When the prototype was ready, they needed someone who could boost sales with their status and authority. The head of the Gibson company went to make amends with the offended Les Paul, preparing an irresistible proposal. The new guitar would be named after him, and, with each instrument sold, Paul would receive a percentage. In exchange, the great guitarist committed 5 years to appear in public exclusively with Gibson guitars. That is, to become an endorser of the instrument. The only contribution Paul made to the design of the guitar was a proposal to construct the bridge in a slightly different way. The first Gibson Les Paul was released in the spring of 1952 and marked the arrival of the historical giant on the market of solid-body guitars. Much has happened since those days. Guitars have grown more numerous and they have been perfected. For example, modern bridges no longer upset the instrument when rocking. Electronics, such as guitar processors that process the signal from each string and allow you to play complex polyphonic plays, is a huge field. Musicians have even come up with a new method of sound production, called tapping. Every guitar possesses some magic, even the cheapest and most unassuming of models. No wonder Mark Knopfler, an outstanding guitarist and the former leader of the band Dire Straits, said, "The word friend suits the guitar. It can become a dear friend for life." It's funny to talk only about Gibson, Fender, and Martin. I also like simple guitars. I grew up with them side by side, so I'm attached to them, to the clumsy and cheap ones, not just the expensive ones. Real music is something that comes from the soul. The type of guitar you play, even the most perfect and expensive, sometimes has nothing to do with it.
You've been listening to a podcast brought to you by Oyla, a science magazine for students. Please subscribe and check out our website, Oyla, for more information.